Thank you for introduction. Sorry for the long title. And thank you to the organizers, Sylvie and Pierre, for inviting me here. So it was a pleasure to be here. I have to apologize for talking mostly about PDEs and not harmonic analysis. There will be some harmonic analysis in my talk, but it will be mostly hidden in the techniques that maybe I will not have time to present completely. And anyway, it's very basic harmonic analysis. Well, anyway, there will be some motivation for more complicated harmonic analysis, I guess. So let me start with something very basic concerning Navier-Stokes, incompressible Navier-Stokes equations. I start presenting the classical one, which is here. And then I assume that my fluid domain is some open set omega that, well, in a moment it will be the whole space, but for the moment, but just now it will be quite general. So this system has been studied a lot. In particular, well, it's well known that you have some natural invariants related to the system. So the very important one is the energy balance that you can obtain at least formally by taking the scalar product with U, the L2 scalar product with U in the first equation, then integrate by part and so on, and you end up with this relation which said that the kinetic energy at time t plus some dissipation term equals the kinetic energy at time 0. Yeah, by the way, maybe this way of writing this nonlinear term is not totally classical one, at least for physicians. Bigger one. Okay. Well, just that use a relation, this relation, and the interest of having the second form is that it's defined more often than the first one. I mean, it's defined as soon as U is locally in L2, which is not the case of the right form. Okay, so there is a second very important property of this system, at least if you are in domain which has some invariance by dilation, like the whole space, for example, is that one. I just wrote the invariance for the velocity field because in general, when you look at this system, the first thing that you do is you use some projection, most projection, so that you get rid of the pressure. So in that case, you have this very easy to see that you have the first two equations are invariant by this transform for all lambda. And now, of course, you have to change the initial data accordingly. So if you, from a historical point of view, the first thing that has been used in mathematics is energy balance. And then by playing with energy balance and compactness arguments, Leray in 34 was able to prove this result, very general result, which said that if you start with U0 in L2, the divergence free, then you can construct a global in-time solution in the sense of distributions, except that at that time, theory of distribution was not quite invented, but anyway. And also, very importantly, the solution satisfy not energy balance, but energy inequality. I mean, instead of having equality, just have inequality. The reason why that, as the proof is mostly based on compactness arguments, as you know, when you have a sequence which is bounded in some, let's say, Sobolev space, then you lose something when you're going to the limit. So there are several different ways of presenting the proof, but what's important is that it's not based on the contracting mapping argument, it's based on compactness or more complicated fixed point argument, like Schroeder-Tikhonov. So in dimension 2, there is a miracle, which is that, in fact, the energy balance is exactly at the level of scaling invariance, so that you can prove, it has not been done in paper by Leray, but you can prove uniqueness altogether with no more assumptions. And you can also solve the system by fixed point. So now let me go to the second, so this statement was based on energy balance mostly. Now, if you there is totally different orthogonal approach. Well, maybe the motivation is that when you are dimension 3, which is a physical dimension, if you don't add more assumption, then you have no uniqueness. So what was natural is to ask for more regularity to have a uniqueness. So there was first works were probably in the 50s, but I think that the first systematical approach was imagined by Fujita and Kato in 1964. It was based on this reformulation of the Navier-Stokes equations. So you introduce the Stokes operator A, like this, and then you rewrite, you consider the semi-group associated to Stokes operator, and then you see that formally solving the Navier-Stokes equation is equivalent to solving this fixed point problem. Okay, so you have a first term, which is just a free evolution of the initial data by the Stokes equation. So it's something which is fixed, which is none. And then you have something which is quadratic with respect to u. So finally, what you have to do is to solve this kind of problem, okay, where UL is given. And this may be done very easily just by using a standard fixed point theorem, provided that you have some smallness of this free evolution. In fact, this lemma is totally abstract lemma, which has nothing to do with the Navier-Stokes equation, something completely general, which may be proved in 3 or 4 lines, which said that whenever you have some smallness, then you can solve the problem. And the solution is even unique in some ball. In general, you can do even better. Okay, so of course, here UL is no longer the initial data. Okay, the free evolution of U0. So here are a few examples. Also, if you are okay, now if you consider this system, this equation, in the case of Navier-Stokes equation, just by trying to prove continuity of this bilinear map, you will discover quite soon that it's very convenient to have a Banach space which has the same scaling invariance as Navier-Stokes equation itself. And then there are now many famous examples of spaces in which you can prove continuity of B. So I did not exactly write the spaces, but more the space corresponding to the initial data. So the first one was been introduced by Fujita and Kato. It was a Sobolev space. In fact, it was not exactly this homogeneous Bezier space, but just because Fujita and Kato worked in the bounded domain. But the spirit was it was in dimension 3 and it was alpha derivative in L2. And then after that, there were also results in Lebesgue space. So critical Lebesgue exponent is the same as the dimension. And then there are plenty of all the zoology of fractal spaces in which you can solve Navier-Stokes equation in a unique way. So of course you have uniqueness, but there is something that you lose. What you lose is global in time, unless you have some smallness condition. So now the goal of my talk is not this classical Navier-Stokes equation, but something which is a bit more complicated. I don't mean that the classical Navier-Stokes equation is completely solved, but so in real life, incompressible fluid need not be completely homogeneous. In general, you have small variation of density, or sometimes even large variation of density. Or also you can have the situation where you have two different incompressible fluids, viscous fluids, with constant density, but different density. And then you can derive, at least from physical point of view, this more general version of incompressible Navier-Stokes equation, where now you have one more unknown, which is density. Okay, that I wrote in red. So density rho of the fluid, which is of course a non-negative quantity. So now you have to explain what is the evolution of density. So evolution is just mass conservation. Maybe derived by mass conservation. And then you get this equation, which is in fact a transport equation, because this may be written also U grad rho, since divergence U is 0. Okay, so what is the situation concerning, natural conservation laws related to this system? So you still have energy balance, which is almost the same, except that, of course, the kinetic energy now involves the density. Okay, and then you have this, apart from this fact, energy balance is the same one as before. Okay, except that you have to keep in mind that you just know that rho is non-negative. So sometimes you may imagine that sometimes, well, at least this term is some, you may have vacuum, and sometimes this term may vanish in some parts of the domains. And you also have, for the mass equation, you have conservation of LP norms, of course, since you are divergence free. And more generally, you can put any function of rho here, and you will get the same equation. And then you have a conservation of LP norms of any function of rho. You have also conservation of the supremum of rho, of the infimum of rho, and so on. Scaling invariance for velocity is the same as before. And for density, there is no lambda here, which means that it's somehow you have one more derivative on rho. Okay, rho is more regular, at least from scaling point of view. Rho has to be more regular than u by one derivative. So an example in which you have this invariance for rho, of course, is the space of bounded function, which is quite natural because you expect to have some control on boundedness of rho from above and below. So now if you try to play the same game as for incompressible Navier-Stokes equation, just using energy balance and conservation of LP norms, you can prove, a bit long, sorry, you can prove a result in the same spirit as Jean Leray's result, which says that starting from data with finite kinetic energy, non-negative rho, and bounded, in fact you can improve that even, but this statement is true, then you get a global in time weak solution. So this result has been first proved by Kazhikov in 1974 in a very, very short paper in Russian, 4 pages paper, with an additional assumption, which was that rho 0 was strictly positive. Because in fact, the biggest difficulty here is the places when you try to play with compactness and so on. If you start to have places where rho vanishes, then you are in trouble. And then the result has been improved by Jacques Simon. He was able to consider the case where the vacuum as a complete result, which is even more complete than that one because it has been done by Lyons. It's more complete in the sense that he was able to consider the case where the viscosity depends on rho. Well, now if the viscosity depends on rho, it's not, you have to put somehow the mu inside, right? It's a bit not exactly this system. So you see that somehow the global existence theory of weak solutions is the same as for the classical incompressible equations, except in dimension 2, because in dimension 2, with normal assumptions, you are very far from being able to prove uniqueness, in fact. The reason why is that the mass equation is of hyperbolic type. So if you try to prove uniqueness just by the most obvious method, which is you compare 2 solutions, you write the equation of a difference between 2 solutions, then you will have see something sort of parabolic for the difference of 2 velocities. But it will be no longer the case for difference of 2 density, and you will have one term where you lose one derivative. It's what happens in general when you look at a hyperbolic nonlinear system. So this one is not hyperbolic, but it's mixed. Somehow it's hyperbolic parabolic. So in order to get uniqueness, you can ask for more regularity. So to my knowledge, the first paper in this direction is due to Ladizhenskaya and Solonikov. 78. Well, the English translation is 78. The Russian paper was a bit before. And they got something quite satisfactory. It means that whenever you have enough regularity and no vacuum was very important, then you have the same kind of results in the case with constant density. I mean, you have a global existence dimension 2 with large zeta. And also in dimension 3, if velocity is small, but only velocity. No, you don't need some smallness on density or density minus some constant. Okay, so let me go, after this long introduction, let me go to the topic, to the aim of my talk. So the aim of my talk is to construct rough, singular solutions of this system, but not too singular. I mean, I want to have unique solutions. And the situation that I have in mind is a case where the density is not continuous. Okay, typically, I want to be able to consider the case where you have fluids with two different fluids with different density and some interface and so on. So I want to be able to propagate some information on the interface. Typically, if interface is smooth initially, I want to be able to say it is the case for small time or even for large time. If possible, it would too fast. If possible, I would like to be able to consider the case where there is vacuum and or this with uniqueness. So at first sight, there is a big obstacle. The big obstacle as regards interface is that formally interfaces are going to be propagated by the flow of the velocity. And if you don't want to lose anything, any irregularity, then it means that you have to be able to construct the flow by means of the Cauchy-Lipschitz theorem. And so the minimal assumption is that one, okay, Ly in time, L infinity space. So it's quite a lot of regularity compared to the energy space, for example. Even in dimension 2, by the way, and even for the heat equation, if you start with a finite energy data, you will not have this information. In fact, you miss it by a little in dimension 2 and by much more in dimension 3 or 4. Okay, so here I want to present 3 different kinds of approach for solving this problem. The first 2 approaches will be based on 2 different versions of maximal regularity. The first one is not completely is not the orthodox one, but it works quite easily, and for me it's much easier to use it and to prove it. And the second one is the classical maximal regularity that I've been mentioned before several times here. And the third approach is something completely different. I would say it's something that could have been done maybe 40 or 50 years ago, because it's just basic energy approach. But in fact, it's a bit disappointing, because here you will have something very sophisticated and not complete result, and this one somehow will give something much more satisfactory. Well, of course, it's related to this system. The first 2 approaches may be adapted to other fluid mechanics system quite easily. Okay. Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'm confused with your requirement that rho 0 be discontinuous, because in the previous theorems there is no regularity assumed on rho 0. So what do you mean exactly?
The density of
yeah, rho 0.
rho 0 is regular. I mean,
in the previous theorem, rho 0 was regular?
not for weak solutions. I'm talking about in this slide.
Yes.
Now, this slide, the aim of the talk, rho 0 is not, we want to be able to consider rho 0 not regular. In a framework where you have uniqueness, or maybe I misunderstood. And before, there is no regularity whatsoever for weak solutions. Here, yeah, no regularity at all, but it's weak, you have no uniqueness. You are far from. Yeah. Okay, so from now on, at least in the first 2 parts, for simplicity, I will assume that the domain is the whole space. You can adapt this to more general domains, but then it's more technical. I also assume that so in this first approach, I will completely not be able to consider vacuum. So I will fix the reference density to 1 and assume that somehow, for some suitable norm, rho tends to 1 at infinity. So for that reason, I will slightly transform the system. Okay, as I will have, so I split density in the reference density and some perturbation, A. And then the system for A and U reads this. You have the same scaling invariance as before. And what is important here is that you recognize in red the non-stationary, the evolutionary stock system, okay, for which you have many results. So the result that I will use for that system is that one, is, maybe I have some time, but just will give a very short proof of that. Yeah, it will be, in passing, it will allow me to recall the definition of this Bezier space. So I have some Littlewood-Paley, homogeneous Littlewood-Paley decomposition. And then this norm BSP1 may be defined in that way. I'll just define the norm, okay, not the space. So you take a L1 type summation on J. Here you have the regularity index. And then you take LP norm on each block, diagonal block. And so how can you prove very easily this inequality? You start from the observation that, okay, I will do it, as you are in the whole space, more or less, you can reduce the stock system to the heat equation just by projecting. And so for the heat equation, you have this easy result. You can take any P, even 1 or infinity. And then this is bounded by some constant times this decreasing exponential factor, delta Ju, Lp. So the proof of that is completely obvious if P equal 2, because you just use Fourier-Plancherel theorem. And if P is not 2, it's not too difficult. In fact, you write this as some convolution, you do some integration by parts trick. It's not difficult to get this. So now you apply delta J to the, okay, I will do it for the heat equation. So if you apply this to the heat equation, you did not, well, you will end up with this relation, delta J U0, plus the source term. Delta Jf. Then you take LP norms. Okay, I will take LP norms and apply directly this inequality. Okay, like this. Okay, and now if you perform a L1 in time integration, okay, yes. Okay, if you integrate with respect to time on the whole, on the R plus or just on some interval. So thanks to, you will gain a 2 to the 2j here. And in fact, by using convolution inequality, it will be also the case here. And then you multiply by 2 to the 2 j, js plus 2, and the sum over z, and you will get the result. At least you will get the second term, the L1 in time, and for the N infinity, it's even easier. Okay, so this will be the first ingredient will be this maximal regularity result, which is much easier to prove than the standard one, in fact, at least if you are in the whole space. Okay, so as I will try to adapt Fujita and Kato method for this system, I want to try to work in a scaling invariant space. So the scaling invariance corresponds to S equals d over P minus 1. So the natural space for U and gradient of P will be that one. Okay, you see that what is not, I mean, classical in this result is that you are allowed to take a L1 in time. And thanks to that, you gain 2 full derivatives compared to the data by performing L1 in time integration. Okay, so second ingredient, because well, you have some nonlinear term in the system, which is more or less this one. So you have to explain how you can bound this term. So the key space would be that Bether space, which is an algebra, it's at least or quasi-Banach algebra. It's stable by product. So as here you have one order derivative, by applying divergence you lose one derivative, and then you end up with product that you can bound with a square. So now you have to explain, let me go back just for a small moment. Okay, so you see that here you also have an A, and the same here. So you have to explain what happens if you multiply ut by A. What is the covariant space for A? Okay, so a covariant space will be the largest one, and the largest one is a multiplier space, which says that whenever you multiply A by a function in this Bether space, you end up in the same Bether space. Okay, it is the largest possible space. This is not very explicit, but at least it's a definition. And so finally, as you know that A evolves according to a transport equation, it would be good to have some control of this norm during the evolution. Okay, of course, you can impose this condition initially, but you have to be sure that it will be preserved at time t. And then you have this estimate for transport equation that I don't have time to prove, but which is in fact a consequence. You have, if here instead of multiplier space you put a Bether space, then this inequality is well known. It's not completely obvious, but you have to play with some commutator. It's not too difficult to prove. And now, if the result is true for Bether space, just by using the definition of multiplier space, it will be also true for a multiplier space. Well, bit fast proof, but it's the spirit of the proof. So there is one missing ingredient that I don't want to talk about just now. So just by putting all this together, you end up with this statement. Oh, no, I've been a bit too fast. Okay, by putting all this together, you get this inequality for U grad P. And so you see now that if you are able to ensure that this orange term here and here are small, then finally you will get just something we said that the norm of U grad P is smaller than initial data plus the square of the same. Oh, I missed gradient P, okay. And then it's well known this kind of inequality which says if x is smaller than x0 plus x squared, then you know that you can, by bootstrapping or whatever, you can get a control on x provided x0 is small enough. So it's exactly what happens here. Of course, you have to be sure that this is small. In fact, it's going to be small if it's small initially, just because you have this control that I pointed out before. Maybe an important point, sorry for going back, is that if you use critical index like here, then gradient U is going to be L1 in time with B divided P. Okay, so this norm is controlled, in fact, by that one. So you have this inequality for A in the multiplier space. So putting everything together, then you end up with the result that says that if both A0 and U0 are small, then you have a global in-time control on that quantity. And then, of course, on that quantity also, because this term is going to be small. And then you get this result, which says exactly what I said. You can be any dimension. You have some restriction on P. You cannot take, even you cannot see it at the level of the ingredients that I gave before, but you cannot take P as large as you want. You are limited by, maybe, I don't know if it's optimal, but probably it is. If P is smaller than twice the dimension, then you have a plus small net, then you have a global in-time solution, which is unique. And here you see that it's not, these results are absolutely nothing to do with results based on energy arguments. And in particular, it's based on LP type spaces. And here you can see that this index, if you take P almost equal to 2D, this index is almost equal to -1/2. So you see that you can even afford a negative index of regularity for U0 and still get a strong, unique solution. Okay, and the interest of one of the interests of having negative exponents is the same as for the classical Navier-Stokes equation, that you can take this smallness condition may be ensured for very large data, I mean for data with very large modulus, provided that you have a strong oscillations. Okay, so let me give very shortly the naive scheme of the proof, which is right on the argument that I gave before. Of course, you have to find a way to construct solutions. And as I said before, due to the hyperbolic part of the system, there is no chance to get directly the result by a contractive mapping argument. So you have to do something which is more, not so nice, but usual. You construct a sequence of approximate solutions. You play with compactness, then you try to pass to the limit. The problem is that if you use this direct approach, the problem will be in uniqueness, because in uniqueness, as I said before, you lose one derivative. When you compare two solutions and write the equation for the difference between two solutions, you will lose one derivative for the difference of the two density. And then this loss will be also, because there is some coupling between the two equations, so there will be also a loss in velocity equation. And as you started with really very low regularity, you will have problems in some nonlinear terms. So if you use this naive approach, in fact, you can prove the result, as far as I remember, but just up to D, not to D. Okay, maybe before explaining how to improve the proof, let me give a consequence. So consequence of the proof, you imagine that you have some a situation with two different density, ρ1 and ρ2. Here you have your domain D. So you are like this initially. So as a very easy consequence of this result, there is the fact that if the difference between the two density is small, well, on my slide it's not ρ1 and ρ2, it's C1 and C2. If the difference is small, you need some smallness because of that. Then you have a global solution, unique, and this structure is preserved for all time, and the C1 regularity of the domain is preserved. By this, just by not putting more assumption, I'm not sure that you can preserve more than C1, but you can do C1 quite easily. And the reason why is that you may prove that the characteristic function of D, of the C1 domain, belongs to this multiplier space. It's related to the fact that you don't see the trace. In fact, this relation is equivalent to the fact that d over p minus 1 is strictly less than 1 over p. So you don't see the trace, so you can guess that you can do a lot of things. So shortly, let me explain how to improve the third part. So a way of improving the third part is to work with Lagrangian coordinates. Okay, so what is Lagrangian coordinates? You are just going to follow the particles. So you introduce the flow of U, and as you don't want to lose any irregularity, the minimal requirement will be that one, but that requirement will be ensured because from the construction which has been before, you know that the velocity is gradient of velocity is L1 with value in that space, and that space is embedded in L infinity, and even better in the continuous and varied functions. So you can use Cauchy-Lipschitz theorem to prove the existence of uniqueness of a flow, which is in fact a C1 flow. Okay, and so Lagrangian coordinates is that you change density, velocity, and pressure, and what is very fine is that the density becomes time independent, okay? So you don't have to worry about evolution of density anymore, so now since now it's time independent. So you just have to look the equation for the modified velocity, Lagrangian coordinates. So it looks a bit ugly, like this, but you have to keep in mind that at time zero, this is, well, if you forget about the ρ zero, at time zero, it corresponds exactly to the Stokes system. Okay, because at time zero, matrix A is just identity. So you can guess that at small time, it would be just a perturbation of identity. And if it is the case, then you can use this kind of expansion to prove estimate and so on. And in fact, it's not only this, so you can use this shape for proving uniqueness. So what you are going to do is that instead of comparing, let me take two solutions, starting from the same initial data. The usual approach is to compare at time t, how do you say, two states that do not correspond to the same particle, maybe, but that were that are located at the same place. So Lagrangian coordinates is a bit different. What you compare states which correspond to the same particle initially, but maybe evolve to different solutions. So it turns out to be more efficient. It's even possible. It's more efficient because thanks to that you avoid this loss of derivative. It's more efficient also because you don't have to worry about propagation of multiplier space because it's fixed now. And what else? And you can even I didn't give the proof in that way, but you can even prove the statement that I gave before by fixed point argument that you perform directly on this system. So in fact, there are some subtleties that I don't have to explain. For example, one of the subtleties is that it's very useful to know that there are different ways of writing. Well, okay, you started from divergence u equals 0, then you translate in Lagrangian coordinates, it gives you these relations, and it's very useful to know that there are two different ways of writing it. Second one is just chain rule, and the first one kind of dual argument from chain rules somehow. Okay, there is also another small technical problem, is that of course the proof will be based on estimates for the evolutionary stock system, but now divergence is no longer 0, so you have to be a bit careful, but you can do it. Okay, so now let me go to second approach. Okay. Second approach, which is based on the basic. So the second approach at first sight looks much easier. At least you don't have to introduce multiplier spaces. So I recall here the basic maximal regularity result. So whenever P and R are strictly between 1 and infinity, the three terms on the left-hand side have the same regularity as F, at least if U0 is 0, and if U0 is not 0, just by interpolation or by trace or definition of Bethe space by heat flow or whatever, you end up with this inequality. Okay, so what is very nice here is that and you have to keep in mind that if you want to work at critical level of regularity, you need this exponent here to be connected by P by this relation. Okay, you want that against d over P minus 1. So this introduces some restriction. The strongest one is that P cannot be too large. Okay. P cannot be too large. So in particular, now this exponent, of course, this exponent has to be positive, in fact, which was not the case before. Okay, so now we apply just this inequality to our system. So we take F equals all the nonlinear terms. And now this is going to be very, very easy to bound these nonlinear terms because you just use Hölder inequality, in fact. Okay, so this is the left-hand side, and you play with Hölder inequality, or it's even more easy than the Hölder inequality. And this is just L infinity times LP, finally. And what you have to know, what you know, of course, is that L infinity norm of A is preserved through the evolution, since A it just satisfies transport equation. So if you start with a small A0, then you can forget about the red terms, and you'd end up with this quite easy inequality. So now the only remaining problem is how to bound this quadratic term. So you can notice also that here, for writing these computations, I don't need critical regularity. It works for any p and any r, if strictly between 1 and infinity. So now, the interest of critical regularity that is you will have perfect estimates for that one. This is I mean, you start with Hölder inequality. Okay, so you apply Hölder in time and Hölder in space. Trust me, this is the right exponent. And then you know that in advance that it's going to work because the magic of critical regularity is that you know in advance what kind of inequality you will get. So you know that you should be able to have here the square of this norm. So how can you get this? But just by Sobolev embedding. So by Sobolev embedding, I go to U to gradient of U. So now you have this term square. And now this term square you may control by the LP norm that you have where? Here. And by the Bezoff norm that you have here. And of course the exponents are the right ones, and you end up with the usual inequality, x smaller than x0 plus x squared. So that you can close the estimates. So now if you don't start with critical regularity, what happens? Well, if either you are below critical regularity and then you get nothing, or you are above and then you will have you will get the same kind of equality but with some power of t. So there is you don't know how to in that way you have no chance to close the estimate for all time. Okay, so let me give the statement that had been proved by Huang, Marius Paikou, and Ping Zhang a few years ago. So the first part says exactly what I said. I mean, you start with a small a0, small u0, and you have a global in time solution in the expected space. What miss here is uniqueness. You have existence, but not uniqueness. And with no more assumptions, not clear that you can get uniqueness just because, as we saw before, the way of getting uniqueness, the most efficient way is to use Lagrangian coordinates. But in order to define Lagrangian coordinates with no loss of regularity, the minimal assumption is that one. And now, if u and grad p is in that space, you will have second derivative of u in LP. But as p is strictly less than 2, you will have no embedding in that space. You miss that embedding. The critical embedding would correspond to p equals z and r equals 1, in fact. So in order to overcome the difficulty, you can say, okay, I keep this assumption, and then I add some extra regularity on U0. So it's exactly what Wang, Paikou, and Zhang did. So they put here, in fact, well, in their original paper, it was not written in that way, but you can get it in that way. You keep the same regularity here, but more integrability. And thanks to more integrability, in fact, you are beyond critical regularity. And so here you will have second derivative in U in L p tilde with a p tilde which is greater than the dimension. So you will have this control. And thanks to that, you can go to Lagrangian coordinates and get uniqueness. Okay, so let me pause just a minute to make some comments on the first two approach. So as you see, what is obvious, the common point of the first two approach is that, well, first some small comment that you can adapt this, the two approaches you can maybe adapt it to any domain where you are able to prove the same kind of maximal regularity result. So I am not a specialist of that, so I can just say that it works in a bounded domain if it is smooth. Smooth, I mean at least C11, but there are specialists of Lipschitz domains here, so maybe they know if it works in the Lipschitz domains. And also you have a local version of this result with large velocity, but there is a terribly important assumption in all this for these two approach. Is that the perturbation of reference entity has to be small. It's quite obvious because, in fact, I did not really, I mean, the basis of the approach was maximal regularity with for the stock system with constant coefficients. I treated the non-homogeneous part just as a perturbation. So if perturbation is no longer a perturbation, of course, this doesn't work. There is also another aspect I didn't mention before, is that for the true physical model, you may allow the viscosity to depend on the density. And in my case, the density, well, is very rough, just bounded mostly. So it's not clear. I don't know how to adapt this to the case of viscosity is not constant. So with my collaborator Piotr Mucha, we came up recently with a completely different approach. It was a bit disappointing in the sense that finally all these sophisticated methods were not so, somehow less efficient than the very old energy method. So let me go back to the energy balance, which is that one. As I said before, if you just start from U0 in L2, then you will get this. And even dimension 2, you will be far from, you will not be able to get enough regularity to prove uniqueness, for example, or to control the regularity of interface. So what is very tempting is to say, okay, let us add more regularity on 0, but still staying in the energy space. Okay, so let me start with, okay, I don't want to be technical, so I just say, okay, I put one more derivative, so I am in H1. Is it possible to propagate, to have some control on H1 regularity of U for all time? Maybe time dependent, but still control, with no more assumption. I mean, just U0 H1, and let's say rho 0 bounded. And surprisingly, the answer was yes. At least, okay, so for the statement is dimension 2, there are some, you can, well, the important assumption here, beside dimension 2, is that you see that I put the torus just because I don't know how to put the results in R2. In fact, a very important assumption is that the domain has to be bounded. We have similar statement in bounded domain, but for unbounded domain, we don't know how to get the result, at least for all time. For small time, okay, but... Okay, so for simplicity, let's assume that I am in the torus, periodic boundary condition, dimension 2. I assume U0 in H1, which is a lot of regularity to compare to critical regularity, because critical regularity would be L2. But I assume almost nothing on the density, just assume that it's non-negative and bounded. I mean, it may vanish in some places. It doesn't have to be close to some constant, positive constant, anything. And then, well, if there is what you are able to do is to keep the H1 regularity, to have a control on this, for all time, but no continuity in time. Continuity in time, in fact, is false. And you have a gain, kind of parabolic gain of regularity on the space derivative. Okay, so U is L2 H2 as expected, as you start from H1. And it's also the case for the time derivative, provided you put some weight. And then you have some extra information here, which are here, which say that you see that here M can be as large as you want. You can take almost M equal infinity. 1 over square root of T is almost in L2. Not quite true, but almost. So in fact, this second result said that gradient, the second gradient of U is almost L1 L infinity, which means that the flow is almost C2. But if the flow is almost C2, if you go back to this interface problem, it means that you can propagate almost C2 regularity for interface, which is more better than before. And also something which is much better, that here you can allow one of the two density to be 0. Okay, so you can consider the case where you have a bubble of vacuum in a liquid, or a drop of liquid in vacuum, and still you have this result with control of interface regularity and with uniqueness. And all this has nothing, I mean, probably there were some works, related works on that before, but they were using, well, the free boundary approach, with immediately very technical and not so general, because you have to restrict the set of solutions, which is not the case here. Okay, I have to be fast. Okay, so main step of the proof, I will, in fact, there are more steps, but I will concentrate on the first three. So, in fact, the most important step is the first one, is the one where you explain how you can propagate H1 regularity of U for all time. Then, after having this first step, the second and third step are just consequence of it, somehow. And then, to have the complete scheme of the proof, you also have to explain how to get existence, because you have to be careful, so completely obvious, you may have vacuum and so on. And I will completely skip uniqueness, but once again, it's based on Lagrangian coordinates. And also, just to simplify the notation, I can do some time renormalization to have viscosity equal 1, and I can do some density renormalization to have average equal 1. And also, by using Galilean invariance, you can show that the momentum is 0, total momentum is 0, and this assumption is propagated, or all these assumptions are propagated for all time. Okay, so let me go to the H1 estimate. So the way you do that, you start with the equation, velocity equation. You take the scalar product with the time derivative of U. So this method is well known. I mean, certainly there are hundreds of people that did this kind of computation, either on this system or even on the classical Navier-Stokes equation. And so the only difficult term, is the red one, which corresponds to convection. So so what you can observe is that so here there is just information on time derivative, but you can also get information of the Laplacian of U and gradient of P just by observing that you can write this as a Stokes equation with some source term, and as you are in L2, you have equality, in fact. Okay, this is a divergent free, and this is a gradient. So you have this relation. So again, you may bound this relation by this. You can, just by playing by Young inequality, you are going to be able to absorb this term. And at the end, you get this, okay, which is basically the same inequality as on the second line, except that now you also have something on the gradient square U and gradient P. Okay, so now how can you bound this nonlinear term? So you are going to use Hölder inequality, L4. And then you are in dimension 2, so you know the well-known Gallardo-Nirenberg or Ladyshenskaya inequality. Depends on the audience. When I am east from here, it's better to say Ladyshenskaya inequality. And you get this. And then again, you play with a Young inequality. With the most dangerous term is that one, but you can put a small coefficient. So thanks to that, you can absorb it by the left-hand side. And you are left with that one. So that one, you recognize the L2 norm of gradient U square that you have here. So you can guess that at the end you are going to play with a Grunwald lemma. So now there are two situations. Either you have a positive lower bound for the density, so that you can replace the L2 norm here by the kinetic energy. And once you get this, indeed you can play with Grunwald lemma and get a global existence. Global control of gradient U. It's more or less what the Ladyshenskaya and Solonikov did in '78, even though they have more regularity. Or you don't have this control, and then you have to improve this inequality. So the improvement, in fact, has been performed by Benoît Desjardins in his PhD thesis. But it was not for this system, it was for something else. And the improvement is that you have the same as before. L4 is controlled by L2, up to some logarithmic loss. I am not, well, in fact, the proof in the Desjardins paper is a bit long, but in fact you can, I don't really have time to do it, but what you do, I just write the first line. So what you do, I'm going to cheat a little. I assume that Z, you decompose Z into two parts with Zn is just, I assume that the average of Z is 0 to simplify. So you decompose Z in Fourier series. Like this. And then, okay, so you have to bound this. So you use triangle inequality. So you will have this one. And a similar one for the high frequencies. You have to put some square roots. And then here, for the first one, the first one is going to be bounded by square root of rho z L2 times Zn L infinity. And the second one, it will be, so there will be 1/4, I think, here. And then you will have the sum term. And you will use a L4 norm. So just by using this, you can see that this L infinity norm is bounded by square root of log n times gradient L2. And here, by using embedding of h1/2 in L4, you will get factor n minus 1/2, something like this. So at some point, you have to play with a Young inequality. Okay, so you put a small coefficient here, will be absorbed with that one. What did I do? Maybe it's 1/4 here, otherwise it doesn't work. And then you take the best n and you get the result. Just a 3 lines proof. Okay, so very quickly. Okay, so now instead of using Gaillardo-Nirenberg inequality, you use that one. You will have, so you get this bound for the convection term, which is the same as before, except that now you have this log correction. And then you end up finally with this kind of inequality. Okay, before in the classical case, it's just fx. Now it's fx times a log, but as you know, you can integrate this, and finally you get this global in time control, which is, well, okay, double exponential, but you have this, something anyway, and it's global in time. Okay, so very shortly, why we don't stop here? We don't stop here because we end up with L2, H2 on U, but H2 is not embedded in the set of Lipschitz functions. So once again, you miss, by very little, but you miss this quantity, which is terribly important for propagating interface and also for uniqueness. So to get this information, you are going to play a little more with the equation. So now what you can do is to try to get estimate on the time derivative of the time derivative of U. So you can do it just by energy argument, by multiplying like this, and you end up with inequality, with this equality. So you can deal with the right-hand side. Well, just you have to play with Sobolev embedding there as usual. What is bad is that, of course, at some point you will have to integrate this. And so the question is, what is the meaning of this at time 0? Okay, because what is given is not the time derivative at time 0, it's U0. So if you look at the equation, this has a meaning provided that you have this compatibility condition, which is not good because imagine that you have some vacuum place. So if you have some vacuum place, it means that, up to a gradient, U0 has to be a harmonic function. So it's quite restrictive. So if we don't want to impose this relation, it's not surprising, in fact, because for scaling point of view, taking one time derivative of U is like taking two space derivatives. So if you ask for this, it means that you need U0 to be in H2. And we are only in H1, so for scaling reasons, H1 is like half a derivative. But equivalently, alpha over 2, it's like multiplying here by looking for estimate for this quantity. Okay, sorry, I'm a bit fast, but it's completely equivalent. In fact, if you look at the heat equation, this is just completely equivalent. This is a characterization of Sobolev space by heat flow. Okay, so the right quantity to consider is not ut, but ut with this time weight. And of course, you still have this square root of rho because it's not a heat equation, but something a bit more complicated. And by using the first step, you can get this control. So now you have much more information on ut. So you have one, by performing L2 in time, you have one derivative in space, well, in fact, you have ut in H1. So ut in H1, from scaling point of view, you can expect that u is in H3. U in H3 it's really a lot, and if you can get this, you will have Lipschitz result as expected. So you cannot do it directly, but what you can do, you put what you have in step 1, what you have in step 2, and now you look again as u as a solution of Stokes equation, but with this time weight. And you discover that the right-hand side is almost, not quite true, but it's almost in L2 and infinity. So of course, infinity is not a good space, but imagine it's a good space. If it's a good space, it means that second derivative of square root of t of u are here. And then it turns out to be enough to have a control on gradient 2. And then from this, you can, I think it's my last slide. So from this, you can get missing information, and then you can prove uniqueness. It's not completely obvious, in fact. In particular, in the case of a bounded domain, you have to be a bit careful, but it's doable. Okay, thanks.